October 8, 1943, 6,000 feet above the Netherlands, Flight Officer Ralph Hoare gripped the control stick of his Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, his first combat sortie barely 20 minutes underway. The farm boy from Salem, Missouri, had never unleashed his guns in anger until that moment. Yet through the oil-streaked windscreen, he watched a Messerschmitt 109 rip into an American fighter with deadly precision. What followed would defy every regulation his commanders had drilled into him. Maintain formation. Never chase alone. Guard your leader above all else. But something inside Ralph Hoare, something forged in Missouri wheat fields and Chicago boxing rings, dismissed those rules entirely. He broke sharply left, dove away from his element, and went hunting. The gun camera footage examined that evening at RAF Debden left veteran pilots astonished. Men who had flown dozens of missions without ever firing their weapons. A Bf-109 filled the frame at point-blank distance, absorbing punishment from 8 50-caliber machine guns. The German aircraft rolled, plunged, and burst apart. On his first combat flight, the farm boy, with no flying experience before 1941, had done the impossible. He had scored a kill. But that was only the beginning. Over the next 9 months, Ralph Hoare would destroy 30 German aircraft through tactics so daring, so undisciplined, and so effective that his superiors debated daily whether to ground him or promote him. His aerial maneuvers defied every established doctrine. The young man, who had joined the Royal Canadian Air Force on a whim, became the 20th highest-scoring ace in the 8th Air Force, and the second highest-scoring pilot killed in action. His story reveals a truth the military hierarchy seldom admits. Sometimes the greatest warriors prevail, not despite breaking every rule, but because they do. June 22, 1921. On a farm near Salem, Missouri, Ralph Halbrook entered a world where aviation was a distant fantasy to rural Americans. His father worked in a region where automobiles themselves were still curiosities. The boy who would one day fly the world's most advanced fighter grew up in homes without electricity or indoor plumbing, without any hint that the sky would become his arena. When Ralph was 4, his father died. His mother remarried, and the boy took his stepfather's surname, Hoare. The name would later appear in combat reports, intelligence briefings, and memorials across England. But in 1925, it was simply the name of a Missouri farm kid learning to work the soil, repair machinery, and endure the Depression. Athletics saved him from the grinding poverty that consumed rural Missouri in the 1930s. He captured a Golden Gloves trophy in the light heavyweight division in 1940 and played semi-professional football in Chicago leagues. His physical coordination, reflexes, and willingness to take punishment, all honed in boxing rings and football fields rather than classrooms, became the foundation of his combat style. The aggression that would later terrify German pilots was sharpened against opponents at Trafton's gym in Chicago, where his family had relocated. He even boxed professionally for a time under the name Halbrook, sparring with the legendary Billy Conn. By 1940, Ralph Hoare had abandoned any notion of formal education. He briefly attended junior college with a passing interest in commercial art, but the rigid structure smothered him. He returned to Missouri and took a civilian job at Fort Leonard Wood. His plans, such as they were, involved heading west to California to pursue prize fighting full-time. Aviation never crossed his mind. The transformation from drifter to combat pilot happened entirely by chance. In the fall of 1941, Hoare headed north to Detroit, Michigan. He'd agreed to deliver a brand-new 1942 Hudson automobile from the factory to a buyer on the West Coast in exchange for travel costs. While waiting for the car to be ready, he took a day trip across the Detroit River to Windsor, Ontario. A border officer, assuming the young American had crossed specifically to enlist, directed him to a Royal Canadian Air Force recruiting station. Hoare had never considered flying. He had never even sat inside an airplane. He had no technical training, no navigation experience, no grasp of aerodynamics or ballistics. But his trademark impulsiveness took over. On July 19, 1941, mere hours after crossing the border, he enlisted in the RCAF as an aviation cadet. The car delivery was forgotten, as were California and prize fighting. That decision should have ended in disaster. Flight training demanded mathematical precision, technical knowledge, and disciplined attention to instruments, qualities Hoer seemingly lacked. Yet somehow he completed elementary flight instruction in Canada. He mastered basic flight control, passed navigation despite his weaknesses, and absorbed gunnery lessons despite never firing in the air. By October 1942, Sergeant Pilot Hoer shipped to Britain. The RCAF assigned him to further instruction rather than combat. Months slipped by as the war raged across Europe and North Africa. America had entered the conflict after Pearl Harbor, but Hoer remained in training units, watching from the sidelines and growing restless. In June 1943, opportunity struck. The U.S. Army Air Forces began accepting transfers from Americans serving in the RCAF. With his flight hours, Hoer qualified for immediate combat assignment. On June 11, 1943, his transfer elevated him from sergeant pilot to flight officer, a unique rank for non-commissioned aviators, and placed him squarely on the road to war. Before combat, however, came more schooling. The U.S. Army Air Forces demanded proficiency in the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, a 5-ton fighter powered by an 18-cylinder radial engine generating over 2,000 horsepower. The P-47 was unforgiving to the careless. Its mass and torque demanded discipline and respect. Hoer, true to form, approached it with confident defiance. September 1943. RAF Station Debden, Essex. Flight Officer Hoer reported to the 334th Fighter Squadron, 4th Fighter Group, 8th Air Force. He couldn't have joined a more storied unit. The 4th Fighter Group, formed on September 29, 1942, had absorbed 3 legendary RAF Eagle squadrons, 71, 121, and 133, composed entirely of American volunteers who had fought before the U.S. entered the war. The Eagles brought their own ethos, fiercely independent, aggressively bold and disdainful of rigid military formality. They'd earned their reputation flying Spitfires over France and the Channel, and the switch to U.S. command did nothing to tame their rebellious streak. The 4th became known as the most daring, most individualistic, and most lethal fighter group in the 8th Air Force. Into this cauldron strode Ralph Hoer, exuding his own brand of chaos. With his long brown hair flouting grooming codes, a bright blue football jersey emblazoned with the number 78, and a gold snake ring gleaming on his left hand, he looked more like a college athlete than a soldier. Around base, he was often seen with Duke, an Alsatian dog adopted from a downed pilot. Witnesses swore Hoer sometimes took Duke on local flights, crouching low to make it look like the dog was piloting. He even left his parachute behind to make room. His irreverence didn't stop there. Military police once detained him in London for lacking rank insignia, and discovered he wasn't carrying ID. His Class A uniform was tailored in zoot suit fashion, more at home in jazz clubs than military briefings. Hoer met discipline with a grin and continued flying exactly as he lived. By instinct, not by regulation. Everything about him suggested someone who would wash out of combat aviation within weeks. Then came October 8, 1943. The 4th Fighter Group scrambled to escort Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress bombers attacking targets in Bremen, Germany. Hofer flew as wingman to Captain James A. Clark, a veteran Eagle Squadron pilot, in borrowed P-47 C-41641 marked QPG. His duty was simple: stay in formation, cover his leader, watch for enemy aircraft, Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Do not break formation under any circumstances. Over the Netherlands, German fighters attacked. Messmid 109s dove from above, forcing the American formation to break. Hoer's Thunderbolt flicked and spun down. Coming out west of Zala, when Heer gained control, he found himself alone at low altitude, separated from his flight, lost over enemy territory on his first combat mission. The textbook response would have been to climb, orient himself using landmarks and sun position, and head west toward England at maximum speed. Hoer ignored the textbook entirely. At low level over the Dutch countryside, he spotted a Messes 109 chasing a P-47. Smoke poured from the American fighter as the German pilot pressed his attack. The P-47 turned right and dove from 1,300. Clearly doomed, Hoer reacted on instinct rather than training. He closed on the Messmid at full throttle, accelerating to attack speed. The Messid 109 pilot, focused entirely on his victim, never saw the threat behind him. At 100 yards, Hofer opened fire. 850 caliber machine guns converged on the German fighter. Strikes and flashes erupted along the fuselage. Oil sprayed back, coating Hofer's windscreen. The Messid 109 rolled over and dove straight down. Hofer had tossed his control stick forward violently to avoid ramming the enemy aircraft. By the time he pulled out of the dive, oil completely obscured his forward vision. He headed west toward the coast at 300 feet east, effectively blind. His adventure still was not over. A half-mile offshore, a small German patrol vessel opened fire. Hofer, with nuclear forward vision and low on ammunition, took several short bursts at it before turning for England. He landed at Debden hours later, one of the last aircraft to return. Ground crew immediately noticed something unusual. The protective tape placed by armorers over clean gun muzzles was broken. The new pilot had fired his weapons on his first mission, a rare occurrence. When Hoer reported to his intelligence officer and related his story, veterans gathered to view the gun camera footage with deep skepticism. New pilots simply did not score kills on their first missions. The statistics were clear. Most pilots flew dozens of sorties before even seeing an enemy. Aircraft clearly enough to engage. The film began to roll. There on the screen, filling the frame at close range, was a Messmit-absorbing, devastating fire. Strikes walked up the fuselage. The canopy shattered. Pieces flew off the airframe. The aircraft rolled inverted and dove out of frame. The impossible had happened. The farm boy from Missouri had scored on his first combat mission by breaking every rule he had been taught. Over the next 4 months, Hoer flew regular missions without scoring additional victories. On February 6, 1944, he brought down another Messes 109 over France. Then his personal score began to climb with terrifying speed. Between his second victory and the end of May 1944, Hofer would destroy 28 more German aircraft. His tactics evolved in a direction that horrified his commanders while producing undeniable results. March 18, 1944, the 4th Fighter Group escorted bombers attacking Munich. The unit had recently traded its P-47s for North American P-51 Mustangs, sleek long-range fighters that would become the war's most iconic American aircraft. Hofer was assigned to fly number 4 position in White Flight 334th Squadron. Number 4 meant wingman to the wingman, the most junior position in a 4-ship element. His job was simple. Stay information. Do not engage independently. Over Bavaria, Hoer spotted a Messmit 109 below the formation. Without radio call, without warning to his leader, he split from White Flight and Dove. The Messes never knew what hit it. 50 caliber rounds tore through the fuselage. The German fighter crashed in a ball of fire. Hoer pulled up, looking for his flight. They were gone, far ahead, unaware they had lost their number 4. While climbing to rejoin, Hoer spotted another Messid 109. He gave chase. The German pilot suddenly glimpsed the P-51 close behind and immediately bailed out rather than fight. Hoer now found himself completely alone. deep in German airspace with a malfunctioning radio that prevented communication with friendly forces. The sensible response would have been to set course for England immediately. Instead, Hauer went looking for more targets, has spotted a German airfield and cruised the vicinity hunting. He chased a third Messerschmitt 109 into clouds and lost it. Disappointed but undeterred, he decided to head for Munich, the original target area, hoping to find his flight. En route, he spotted two more messes passing above and in front. Any tactical manual would have screamed at him to avoid engagement. Two enemy fighters versus one American. Deep in German territory, low on fuel. Radio out. The odds were suicide. Hofer climbed after them at full throttle. As he did, his Mustang's propeller pitch control malfunctioned. The propeller blades suddenly lost their ability to bite the air efficiently. The engines screamed. Boost and revolutions per minute spiked to dangerous levels. The aircraft shuddered violently and began losing airspeed while the propeller windmilled uselessly. For the first time in the mission, survival calculations entered Heuer's mind. The Swiss border was relatively close. Switzerland maintained neutrality, interning both Allied and German air crews who crossed its borders. Internment meant survival, though it also meant the war was over. Hofer put the Mustang into a shallow glide toward Switzerland. Once over Swiss territory, he went through bailout procedure. He jettisoned the canopy, preparing to exit the aircraft. At that moment, the propeller pitch control inexplicably corrected itself. The propeller blades bit air again. The engine smoothed. Flying speed returned. Hofer found himself in an open cockpit P-51. With the Swiss Alps below, his aircraft suddenly airworthy again. He made a quick calculation of remaining fuel. With luck, he might reach England. He averaged his fuel consumption against distance and decided to try. The canopyless P-51 flew north and west across German airspace at maximum cruise speed. Wind roared through the open cockpit. Cold at altitude bit through his flight suit. Hours passed. The English Channel appeared. The white cliffs materialized. Kent spread below. Hofer landed at Manston, the emergency field on the Kentish coast, designated for damaged aircraft. When ground crew checked his fuel tanks, they found 6 gallons remaining. 6 gallons in a P-51 that burned 50 gallons per hour at cruise power. He had flown home on fumes canopyless after destroying 2 enemy fighters alone deep in Germany. The mission made Hofer an ace, 5 confirmed victories. He was still a flight officer, one of the lowest-ranking members of the 4th Fighter Group's air echelon. His commanders faced an impossible dilemma. His complete disregard for formation discipline and tactical doctrine endangered other pilots. His willingness to engage enemy aircraft alone against any odds violated fundamental fighter doctrine. Yet, he kept coming back with kills. Gun camera footage proved every claim. Intelligence officers could not dispute the results. Through the spring of 1944, Heuer's score climbed. By the end of March, he had added a Fowler-Wolf 190 to his victories. In April, 5 more enemy aircraft fell to his guns. On April 22, 1944, he was promoted from flight officer to second lieutenant. The promotion changed nothing about his behavior. Then came the last 10 days of May 1944. A period of aerial combat so intense, so successful that it defied comprehension. Hofer claimed 14 German aircraft destroyed, combining aerial victories with ground strafing attacks. 14 kills in 10 days. The scoring rate exceeded that of many pilots over entire combat tours. On May 23, 1944, Hofer was promoted again, this time to first lieutenant. On May 24th, he shot down 2 Fowler-Wolf 190s in aerial combat. On May 29th, he destroyed 5 Heinkel 177s on the ground during Astrafing Run, 4 confirmed and 1 shared with another pilot. The ground victories came from attacks on heavily defended German airfields, where anti-aircraft fire routinely shot down American fighters. Hofer pressed his attacks at minimum altitude, guns blazing, pulling up through flak bursts that shredded other aircraft. On June 2, 1944, Heuer was designated flight commander of a flight in the 334th 34th Squadron. He now held responsibility for leading other pilots. The most undisciplined pilot in the group was now supposed to maintain formation, integrity, and tactical coordination. He developed a reputation for radio indiscipline that matched his tactical recklessness. Where other pilots maintained radio silence or used brief tactical calls, Hoare filled the frequency with comments. His most famous radio transmission came during a mission over the Alps. While other pilots focused on navigation and threat assessment, Hoare keyed his microphone and said, "Gee, ain't the Alps pretty?" June 6, 1944, D-Day. Allied forces stormed the Normandy beaches in the largest amphibious invasion in history. The 4th Fighter Group flew multiple sorties over the invasion area, protecting bombers and strafing German positions. On his second sortie that evening, Hoare's Blue Flight from 334 Squadron caught a German road convoy in Normandy and began strafing runs. They never saw the Luftwaffe fighters above them. A large force of Messerschmitt 109s dove on Blue Flight, while the American pilots were focused on ground targets. 3 of the 4 P-51s were shot down in seconds. Only Hofer escaped. He broke hard, dove for the deck, and disappeared into the spent, growing darkness. Once again, his squadron lost pilots, while their most undisciplined members survived. 5 days later, on June 11, 1944, small arms fire hit his P-51 over France. The aircraft became unflyable. Hoare made an emergency landing at a temporary Allied airstrip in the invasion beachhead. He walked away without injury. Later that day, he flew another aircraft back to Deben, bringing souvenirs, a German helmet, and a copy of Mein Kampf. Late June 1944, the 4th Fighter Group prepared for Operation Frantic, the shuttle bombing mission that would take American heavy bombers from England to targets near Berlin and then onto Soviet bases in Ukraine. Colonel Don Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, would lead 68 P-51s from the 4th and 352nd Fighter Groups as bomber escorts. Blakesley initially grounded Hofer for the mission. Hofer refused to be vaccinated in preparation for entry into Soviet territory. The vaccinations were mandatory. Blakesley went further, denying Hoare access to the officers' club bar. Only when Hoare finally relented and took his shots did Blakesley clear him for the mission. June 21, 1944, 07:28 hours. Colonel Blakesley led the shuttle escort up from Debden. The formation climbed to altitude, rendezvoused with 144 B-17s, and set course for Berlin and eastern Germany. Blakesley briefed his pilots extensively on avoiding combat with German fighters if possible. Anyone forced to jettison drop tanks before passing Berlin would lack fuel to complete the nearly 1,500 mm trip to Ukraine. The message was clear. Stay in formation. Follow the plan. Do not deviate. The mission proceeded smoothly across Germany and Poland. Over western Poland, 1 Mustang and a B-17 were lost in a brief encounter with Fowler Wolf 190s. Hofer, predictably, became separated during the engagement. The formation continued east and navigated carefully over unfamiliar Ukrainian territory. Blakesley's navigational skill proved masterful. The squadrons of P-51s arrived at Piri exactly on time. Before an audience of Soviet dignitaries and Red Air Force officers, Blakesley and his pilots taxied into position and shut down. Taking stock of the force, it became clear that all but 2 P-51s had made it. One had been lost over Poland. The other, piloted by Lieutenant Ralph K. Hofer, was missing. As Blakesley learned later, Hofer had become separated during the brief dogfight, but continued eastward alone. Navigation never being his strong suit, he made an unscheduled landing at a Red Air Force field at Kiev. Well off course, suspicious Soviet authorities held him in protective custody for 4 days, while they verified his identity through proper channels. On June 26th, the shuttle force took off from Soviet bases and hit targets in Eastern Europe before flying onto bases in Italy. Released finally by the Soviets, Hofer followed several days behind with two other pilots whose Mustangs had mechanical problems. During the flight to Italy, one pilot suggested to Hoare that his heading was wrong. Hofer, confident as always in his navigation, despite having no natural aptitude for it, remained adamant he was correct. The two others left to pursue a different course. One arrived in Italy at the intended base. One landed in Sicily. Hofer, running out of fuel, followed a flight of British aircraft and landed in Malta, hundreds of miles off course. 5 days later, he rejoined his group in Italy. On July 2, 1944, Blakesley offered his P-51s as additional escorts for 15th Air Force heavy bombers attacking Budapest, Hungary. The mission launched from Fodia, Italy. The 4th Fighter Group climbed to altitude and set course north. Over Budapest, they encountered a large formation of Messerschmitt 109. A savage melee ensued. Captain George Stanford of the 335th Squadron was leading his flight with Hoare filling in as his wingman. At the start of the engagement, Stanford suffered mechanical difficulties. His drop tanks refused to jettison. Then his engine threw a piston rod, forcing him to break away and head for lower altitude. With no hope of reaching Italy, Stanford Belly landed in a Hungarian wheat field and was taken prisoner. While standing near his wrecked aircraft, Stanford spotted a lone P-51 buzz him at low level. He recognized the aircraft as belonging to his wingman, Ralph Hoare, who had apparently followed him down to check on his condition. What Stanford saw next made his heart sink. A Messerschmitt 109 was positioned directly behind Hoare in perfect firing position. The Messerschmitt opened fire moments before the two planes vanished from view. When the scattered remnants of the 4th Fighter Group returned to Italy that afternoon, 6 Mustangs failed to reappear. Among them was Ralph Hofer. When he did not surface the following day, there was no choice but to officially list Hofer as missing in action. Several weeks later, information arrived through Red Cross channels. Hofer's body had been discovered within the wreckage of his P-51 near Mostar, in what was then Yugoslavia, several hundred miles south of Budapest. The precise details remained uncertain for decades. The truth emerged only gradually over half a century. Stanford's testimony, uncovered in the 1990s, provided the first real breakthrough. It confirmed that Hungarian pilot Ensign Leo Kreski of the Messerschmitt Bf-109, equipped 101 Puma, regiment had claimed an American P-51 on July 2, 1944. Kreski himself was killed later that month. On July 26th, while attacking 15th Air Force bombers en route to Austria. His claim matched Stanford's account, but it did not clarify why Hofer's remains were found near Mostar, far from Budapest. The full narrative finally came to light in 2003, when aviation historian Troy White published his definitive biography. Through exhaustive research in German and Yugoslav archives, White determined that Hofer had not been shot down by an enemy fighter, but rather by anti-aircraft fire over the German-controlled Mostar Sud airfield. His findings suggest that Hofer may have been engaged and possibly damaged by Kreski, as Stanford observed. Whether Hofer was attempting an emergency landing at the airfield, or, true to his nature, intended to strafe it despite sustaining damage remains unknown. What is certain, based on the records of the flak unit stationed at Mostar Sud, is that a P-51 was destroyed at low altitude by Flak Regiment 9, Legion Condor, and crashed into one of the airfield's anti-aircraft emplacements at 12:04 hours on July 2, 1944. The explosion killed 2 gun crewmen and wounded another. The downed pilot was identified as First Lieutenant Ralph K. Hofer, 334th Fighter Squadron, 4th Fighter Group, U.S. Army Air Forces. He had been flying a borrowed P-51B 43-6746, marked QPX. Hofer was just 23 years old, having celebrated his birthday only 10 days before his death. He had completed 74 combat missions, destroyed 30 German aircraft, 15 in aerial combat, and 15 in ground attacks, and earned the Distinguished Flying Cross with 3 oak leaf clusters, along with the Air Medal, Purple Heart, and European African Middle Eastern Campaign Medal with 3 bronze stars. He now rests at Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery in St. Louis, Missouri, in a mass grave. Section 79, Sites 254-256, containing other unidentified servicemen whose remains could not be separated. Hofer ranked as the 20th highest-scoring ace in the 8th Air Force and the 2nd highest-scoring pilot killed in action. Yet, statistics cannot capture his psychological effect on German airmen. By the spring of 1944, the Luftwaffe was hemorrhaging experienced flyers at an unsustainable rate. American escort fighters now filled German skies in overwhelming numbers. Luftwaffe pilots faced hopeless odds, fully aware that American flyers would attack with relentless aggression. Then there were men like Hofer, who didn't merely escort bombers or respond defensively, they hunted. They abandoned formation to chase lone adversaries deep into enemy territory, strafed heavily defended airfields, and treated danger as a challenge to overcome. To German pilots trained in strict formation tactics and disciplined coordination, such behavior seemed suicidal. What they failed to grasp was that aviators like Hofer weren't following American doctrine. They were defying it. Where doctrine stressed formation, integrity, mutual protection, and calculated engagement, Hofer embodied individual ferocity, spontaneous pursuit, and a willingness to accept extreme risk. The 4th Fighter Group produced more aces than any other in the 8th Air Force, 81 pilots with 5 or more confirmed kills, and over 1,000 enemy aircraft destroyed. Within that elite brotherhood, Hofer stood out as the most unconventional, aggressive, and undisciplined of them all. Colonel Don Blakesley, commander of the group and himself a veteran of 490 missions without being shot down, had deeply mixed feelings about Hofer. Blakesley admired results and courage, but despised recklessness. Hofer embodied both extremes. He was grounded multiple times, denied privileges, and yet repeatedly cleared for combat because he kept producing victories. Major James Goodson, another ace of the 4th Fighter Group with 15 aerial and 15 ground victories, wrote warmly, and sometimes wearily, of Hofer in his memoir Tumult in the Clouds. His description of the somber atmosphere at Debden when Hofer failed to return from the Budapest mission moved many readers to tears. The contrast between Hofer and more methodical aces is striking. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin, credited with 19.75 victories, exemplified discipline, flying with precision, maintaining formation, and coordinating closely with his wingmen. Hofer, by contrast, achieved greatness by breaking every rule, proving that sometimes chaos, not order, wins the fight. He managed fuel carefully. His success came from systematic application of tactical principles. Mahurin survived the war, returned to combat in Korea, was shot down and captured, survived prison camp, and retired as a colonel. Major George Prey, the 8th Air Force's highest-scoring ace with 26.83 victories, combined aggression with tactical precision. He led flights effectively. He protected bombers while hunting enemy fighters. He managed risk while accepting danger. Prey was killed in December 1944 when American anti-aircraft gunners mistakenly shot down his P-51 during a low-level chase of German fighters. Ralph Hofer represented the opposite extreme. He ignored formation discipline entirely. He separated from flights intentionally to hunt alone. He engaged at any odds without calculation. He pressed attacks when survival dictated escape. His tactics should have gotten him killed in his first months of combat. Instead, he survived 9 months, scored 30 victories, and became a legend. The question that historians debate is whether Hofer succeeded because of his tactics or despite them. Maximum aggression, unpredictability, and willingness to take extreme risks created opportunities that cautious pilots missed. When Hoher broke formation to chase enemy aircraft, German pilots were not expecting a lone American fighter. When he pressed attacks at close ranges, enemy pilots panicked rather than fought effectively. The other argument suggests that Hofer succeeded through luck and natural skill, despite tactics that repeatedly put him at maximum risk. His situational awareness kept him alive when alone and outnumbered. His gunnery skill let him kill quickly before counterattacks developed. His aircraft handling let him escape situations that trapped other pilots. The truth likely combines both factors. Here's natural aggression and skill created opportunities. His luck let him survive long enough to exploit them. His tactics maximized short-term success while guaranteeing eventual death. He was always going to die in combat. The only question was how many enemy aircraft he would destroy first. For his squadron mates, Hoher's death carried complex emotions. Relief that they no longer had to explain his absences to angry commanders, mixed with grief at losing a friend, and respect for his achievements. The young pilot who wore football jerseys and snake rings, who flew with his dog, Duke, on local flights, who commented on alpine scenery during combat missions, was gone. American war correspondents had lionized Hofer in the months before his death. Virginia. Irwin's extensive profile for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in June 1944 captured his personality in detail. She described a young man uncomfortable with hero worship, but aware of his own success. When she asked about being celebrated for liberating conquered peoples, Hoher replied he would go beat red from embarrassment. When asked about his success as a fighter pilot, he called it just one of those things. After his death, tributes appeared in newspapers across Missouri. The local boy who had drifted through Depression-era jobs, who joined the Canadian Air Force on a whim, who flew 74 combat missions while violating every rule, became a symbol of American fighting spirit. In the decades after the war, Hoher's legend grew. Aviation historians researching 4th Fighter Group records found his story repeatedly. His gun camera footage survived in archives. His after-action reports revealed a pilot who engaged enemy aircraft with shocking frequency. His personnel file documented constant disciplinary issues alongside exceptional combat results. He became a case study in the tension between military discipline and combat effectiveness. Modern fighter pilots studying historical aces inevitably encounter Hoher. His story generates debate in every fighter squadron ready room where it is discussed. Some pilots see him as an inspiration, proof that aggression and individual initiative can overcome doctrine. Others see him as a cautionary tale, a skilled pilot whose indiscipline ensured early death. Both interpretations are valid. The broader lesson of Hoher's story concerns the nature of warfare itself. Military organizations exist to coordinate large-scale violence through systematic application of doctrine. Success depends on coordination, mutual support, and adherence to plans. But warfare also rewards individual initiative, aggression, and willingness to exploit fleeting opportunities. Ralph Hofer existed at the extreme edge of tolerable individualism. His commanders let him operate because he produced results. Had he flown in a unit with less aggressive traditions, he would have been grounded permanently. The 4th Fighter Group provided exactly the right environment for Hofer to thrive. A unit aggressive enough to appreciate his kills, but disciplined enough to function despite his presence. The 30 victories he scored came at a cost beyond his own death. Other pilots died covering for his absences. Formations weakened when he broke away. Missions became more dangerous. His commanders spent hours managing the chaos he created. From a purely mathematical perspective, each German aircraft destroyed represented one less threat to American bombers. By mid-1944, Germany could not replace losses in either aircraft or trained pilots. Every kill mattered. From a systemic perspective, if every pilot in the 4th Fighter Group had operated like Hoher, the unit would have ceased to function. Formation escorts would have disintegrated. Bombers would have gone unprotected. Casualties would have soared. The success of aggressive individual pilots depended on the majority of pilots flying disciplined formations. Hofer was effective because he was exceptional. The 4th Fighter Group's approach was pragmatic. They tolerated Hofer's indiscipline because he produced results while containing the damage his behavior caused. They grounded him temporarily when his actions endangered others too directly. They promoted him reluctantly when his successes demanded recognition. They never resolved the fundamental tension between his value and his chaos. They managed it until the day he was gone. Modern armed forces encounter comparable difficulties with extraordinary performers who cannot or refuse to conform. Special operations units partly address this dilemma by forming groups where bold individualism is not merely tolerated but encouraged. Fighter squadrons do not have that privilege. They must uphold discipline while harnessing personal talent. On July 2, 1944, a farm boy from Missouri, who by all logic should never have been a pilot, who enlisted in the Air Corps on impulse, who flew 74 combat missions while defying nearly every regulation, who destroyed 30 German aircraft through pure audacity, flew into anti-aircraft fire at a Yugoslav airfield, and perished. He was 23 years old. He left behind a mother in Colorado, friends at Debden, a dog named Duke, and a legacy that would puzzle military historians for decades. The 4th Fighter Group continued combat operations until the war's conclusion in May 1945. By then, they had destroyed over 1,000 German aircraft in the air and on the ground. 81 pilots achieved ace status. The unit became the most successful fighter group in the 8th Air Force by nearly every measure. Within that remarkable organization, Ralph Hofer remained singular. Not the highest-scoring ace, not the most technically skilled pilot, nor the most decorated, simply the most aggressive, the least disciplined, the most fiercely individualistic flyer in a group already famous for producing aggressive, independent pilots. His flying style should have killed him within weeks. Instead, he survived 9 months and downed 30 enemy aircraft by refusing to fly the way he had been taught. In the end, that may be the enduring lesson of Ralph Hofer's story. Military institutions train individuals to operate in structured, coordinated ways. Most of the time, that method yields the best results. But on rare occasions, individuals appear who achieve greatness by defying the system entirely. These extraordinary figures challenge command hierarchies even as they deliver remarkable success. The 4th Fighter Group chose to tolerate Ralph Hofer until his death. They could not restrain him, could not duplicate him, could not completely comprehend him. They could only watch in astonishment as a Missouri farm boy who wore football jerseys and flew with his dog destroyed German aircraft at a pace that defied doctrine until flak over Yugoslavia ended his short, violent career. His story endures as a testament to a truth military institutions seldom admit. Sometimes the greatest warriors triumph, not in spite of breaking every rule, but because they do. Ralph "Kid" Hofer was not a model soldier. He was a brilliant combat pilot. And that difference mattered more than any regulation he ever defied.